Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel. This week we have a big game coming out. That is Doom Dark Ages. So in this Dissect video, we're going to look at some assets from Doom Eternal. Let's get started. Alright, so far we've been looking at a lot of characters. So in this video, it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to be looking at environments from the game, and if you subscribe and ring the bell, you probably already saw that community post that I made where I teased what was going to be shown this week. And yes, we're going to have the BFG and other weapons in this video, so make sure you watch the whole thing. Okay, here in Blender, as you can see, we have some environment pieces and they're already textured, although they're textured in a very specific manner. Some of these there's some certain sections that you'll see if you play the game, you'll see if it's a little bit weird because there's a lot that it's been done on these with decals. If you want to know more about decal, please check out the video that I did on Cyberpunk. I go a little bit more in depth into decals there, but yeah, this is a very common practice. So a lot of the things and the decals didn't get the texture out, so we'll probably just delete those. It's just that floating geometry that you see over there. But let's start with the big pieces like this one right here. Let's show the stats. They're already here. And as you can see, we have about 14,720 triangles, which is not bad. It's actually pretty low, but this is a big piece. And if I'm not mistaken, it may be just a background piece. Cylindrical pieces, when it comes to hard surface and when it comes to anything 3D, to be honest, cylindrical pieces and any rounded corners is what gets the most geometry, usually. So that's what you're seeing here. You can see that these corners are nice and chamfer, as we discussed in the Clear Obscure video. The importance of having chamfer edges and not just finishing in kind of like a pointy surface. You can see that this is a cylindrical shape that is not super high, but it's not low either. Sometimes you see games and you see a cylinder and it's like an octagon, but in here they spend a little bit more geometry, and you can see it has a lot more segments. It is very clean how everything is put together, and just like I've always said, when you have hard surface, you don't need to have a bunch of polygons going all around. You can finish your points into triangles like these. It's not going to affect the looks of it, because if we take out the wireframe, you can see that you don't see any weird shading there. So that's one of the things that's very important when you are optimizing hard surface models. Sometimes when you see indentations like this is a very I would say very popular type of indentation that you see in sci-fi assets for hard surface, and they're usually done with normal maps and it looks fine. I'm thinking, because this is a big piece, they just made the detail here. Same thing that we talked about with that character from Clear Obscure. The bigger the pieces, maybe just make things geometry instead of just using normal maps. So this is a surprise. Here's the 0 to 1 space, and then here's everything else, which it is a little bit funny. The issue is that none of this is packed, but this texture that we have right here, and some of the textures that I've seen from some environment art for this game, are just with procedural shaders. If you have procedural shaders, it really, and I know this is gonna hurt some people, but it really doesn't matter. Sometimes you don't need UVs. There are cases where I've also not used UVs, especially in my day job. Sometimes we have models that we just need to do quick renders. I don't UV them. I just throw in an engine shader that already has kind of like a procedural noise, and that goes through without UVing. It looks fine. And usually we don't talk about bones, but I just think it's very interesting how these things move. So let's go into post mode. Let's just start grabbing bones and moving them and see what happens. Okay, there's that. I think these are most rotation based. Probably this is not supposed to move. And there you go. So this rotates like that. It's been a while since I played, last time I played this game, so May have forgotten how certain bits work. Okay, so this is the general bone. And this one right here. Okay, each part has its joints, even though I don't know if these are supposed to be moving. Like, they probably like come up and arm like that. So, like I said, if you look at the geometry of this round surface, it's what takes the most polygon. And because it's a round surface, there's no way that you can just start deleting and getting rid of all these, because this is a very circular shape. So where are those polygons going to go? You need all those polygons. The rounder your surface, the more polygons or the more triangles it's going to take. And just for those who are curious, this is 86,000 polygons, this whole assembly with this one right here. And yeah, as you can see, very, very dense over here. A lot of detail is just modeled in there. So this one right here is the sarcophagus. It acts as a prop, but it has joints. So there's a little bit of mobility in here. And this is a very basic prop. It's 2,400 triangles. It's just a prop that is in there. Again, these days, you don't have to worry about your asset being so low poly if you are targeting the major platform. So unless you're doing Nintendo or you're doing a mobile game, you don't have to worry so much about how can I reduce these to like the bare minimum. You have to have enough detail so that it holds. And especially this one, I'm pretty sure it was sculpted, and you will need to hold all that detail when you bake it down. So you can see the textures are very, very nice in here. Let's just look at the geometry. You know, not much to it. As long as it holds the shape, that is what we need. So if I move the lid, you're going to see that there's something in there. Again, it's just something that is not very specific. So this is what I mean when you do like your hero assets, your background assets. It all depends. There is no, this is the set amount of polygons that you're going to do for a prop. It all depends on what you're doing. So you can see that over here, it looks like they just decimated this mesh. And I haven't talked about decimation yet. So when you are sculpting, because I would say I'm 90% sure that these was sculpted instead of being modeled. I'm talking about the high poly here. When you're sculpting and you produce something that's very high, which is called a high poly, sometimes when you want to take it down and you don't care so much about geometry, just hit decimate. You just make a percentage of how much of that geometry you wanted to keep, and you hit decimate, and this is what you get. Because again, it's not about the flow or the topology or anything like that in those cases, but you can see that the exterior was more intentionally modeled than whatever this is. So this is what tells me that the piece inside, it was just decimated, put there with enough triangles so it bakes down well. And not only does it hold the bakes, but geometry wise, something that conveys what's going on the model. So you can see that this crevice here, this crevice is model, because if they finish this, instead of making it like an indenture, they finish it flat, it would not look as good when you get close to it inside the game. So this is one of the details that you have to take into account, and this also helps a lot when baking. And if you see the UVs for the sarcophagus, very straightforward, just as we have been seeing so far. This is pretty much a box that is unwrapped. This is the lid. And you can see, if we go right here, you can see that it moved. It moved because this is being held by a joint. And in Blender, when we go into edit mode, it kind of like loses the influence from the joint, so it flips. And here they are. You know, it's unwrapped. And looks like the centerpiece is just something else. It's not, it wasn't, I thought it was going to be part of this, but it isn't. So you can see that the seam wise, it's not that hard to seam this because there's so many places where you can hide. So this is hard surface, but since it's made out of rock, there are more like crevices that you can look at and just put your seams there. But overall, you can see pretty good where the detail is laid out. You can see where the chamfers are happening. All right, we already saw some environment pieces. Now let's move on to the weapons. All right, for the weapons, I have 3 pieces here, like from that tease that I posted the other day. We have the BFG with all this texture, looking pretty cool. This is a massive gun, by the way. I also got the Crucible out because there's something about this melee weapon that we need to see. I didn't know it was made this way, but when we look at the UVs, you'll see what's up with this weapon. Of course, most of the weapon is just masks and VFX and flow, so that's why this texture looks a little bit weird. We're just going to focus on the hilt. The chain gun right here, and again, this is another weapon that has some very particular UVs, so we're going to see in a little bit. But overall, let's start with the BFG. 31,978 triangles, which that's quite a bit, but also because, like I mentioned before, if you're making a first-person shooter, the player's going to be looking at the weapon very closely, a lot. So you need a lot of geometry, okay? Be intentional with your art. And you can see a little bit of the flow that goes around with this weapon. So overall, this is pretty common. Like I've made, when I was starting up, one of the things that we used to practice a lot for hard surface was weapons. And this is a very common when you do like the part where you, I'm sorry, I'm not a gun person. So when you do like the handle of the gun, usually you want to do these triangles right here. So there's no need to add extra polygons just for this. Usually you finish this in these kinds of triangles. And this part's very familiar to me because again, I've modeled weapons before. And you can see how everything ends into a point because it's a completely flat surface. It's not going to affect your look. So there's triangles going all over the place. However, there are some floating pieces. Like if we go into edit mode, I just want to see the floating bits. So this piece, I'm pretty sure it's floating. Yes, it is floating. And, you know, it's just something that's modeled on top because why not? Same deal with this. And this is also modeled on top. Again, your mesh doesn't have to all be one single piece. You can see that clearly this clips inside this brown piece and all that. Because if it was part of the same mesh, you're actually creating a problem for yourself. So this is one of those things where work smart. You have to work smart because, yeah, you can. Let me show you how I'm able to combine all these polygons around. But that's just a big waste of time. When you're in the industry, efficiency is very, very important. So make sure you're also very efficient with your work. All right, let's look at the UVs. And these UVs are very particular. So we have the main body of the BFG. And if you go right here, like we talked about before, however, this is a little bit different. So you can see there is some repetition here. So there is this piece, it's right here. This thing right here is this thing right here. Same with this part on the top. This part here is right here, right here. So you don't have to make everything into the 0 to 1 space. A gun is one of those things that usually, not always, but usually a gun is symmetrical on both sides. So there's one of those places where you can just save your real estate. However, I find it very interesting what they did here, and they did into the upper space and this space as opposed to this space. It must be how the engine works. This is one of those things when you ever see something like this, it's just how the engine works. And when I've been looking at models for this game, I found that not everything is squared. Sometimes they do have odd sizes for their resolution. That being said, this is one of those places where you need to be very organized, especially when you're going to mirror things in the UV space outside of the 0 to 1. You have to be super organized. Like there's so many bits and pieces here that if you're not organized, oh man. As far as I know, correct me in the comments if you've seen it, but so far I've seen tools that compact your UVs into the 0 to 1 space. I've not seen a tool that allows you to put certain pieces outside of the 0 to 1 space. You have to do that manually, as far as I know. If there's such a tool, let me know. It'll be really interesting to see if there's something for Blender or for Maya that does this kind of stuff. So let's look at the Crucible. Lots and lots of geometry because this is in the face of the player. These are some nice loops. You can see the loops for the hilt over here and how this part follows a particular direction with flow, and mostly because of the baking, mostly because of how you're going to bake this particular shape. All right, let's look at the UVs because these UVs are very interesting. So just like I mentioned, there are some objects in this game that do not have the actual square texture. It means like a resolution would be the same on the vertical, the same as the horizontal. So 2048 by 2048, 4096 by 4096 if it's 4K, that kind of stuff. But this one is a little bit different. This one is laid out in a more rectangular fashion, going in the vertical space. And this has to do with the engine. Because of the offset, it doesn't mirror this way over here. Like you would think that this thing would be like right here. It's actually on the other side, and this portions, this bits right here. So this is the same as this. This is the same as the bottom piece. They're outside instead of being like on the other side, like we've talked about. So this is why it's very interesting for me to be doing this, because I'm discovering more and more things that I didn't know about certain games. So this is one of the things I always say when I mention that it doesn't matter what tool you use, as long as your art is great, you will get hired, because when you are onboarded, most likely they're going to have to teach you the tools that they use. Because this is probably an engine thing, you will have to be taught, like their engine is not available for the public, so you can train on it. So once you get hired, you will be taught how to do this, why this happens, why this is necessary. I'm pretty sure there's a reason for this. All right, the railgun has a lot of bits and pieces. You can see that the texture still has some bits that are normal maps, because the geometry would be insane if you model these indentations and these bolts and this ridge. Even though there is a lot of geometry on this weapon, there are still bits and pieces that are made normal maps, especially when it comes to like the rivets and the bolts, because that is such a small detail. It's the big things that you want to make sure that you have geometry, because the player's going to get close to it. But other than that, if you have nice normals with good bakes, you can see that the weapon will look good. And yeah, there's no way, if you add this detail, the amount of geometry that you would have to add to the weapon, it'll be insane. If there is a person that does hard surface, let me know how you do this. It's very interesting always to know, because a lot of people do things a little different. So if I was doing something like this, one of these ridges, you can just do it in Substance Painter. Substance Painter is a texturing program that I keep referencing in every video. You can just, instead of having a high poly and bake it down, it used to be that way, but when I got into the industry, Substance Painter was already kind of like ubiquitous, and that's where you were supposed to use. So most of the detail, the normal map detailing that you see right here, you can just go in Substance Painter and just add it. There are alpha maps that you can download in Substance Painter and just add this thing here, depending on your concept art. Also, you need to be intentional when you add this. It's not just, you're not going to distribute detail all over the place with no intention. Like, make sure that there's a reason. Make sure you look at real life weapons, especially when you're making a weapon. You have to look at real life weapon. You just can't, even if it's a sci-fi thing like this, you can't just go by imagination and just start placing bolts, whatever. Alright everybody, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Do you want to see characters from Doom? Let me know in the comments down below if you like to see characters, because I've gotten some characters out. But since we've been doing characters almost every other game that I've reviewed here, I figure I just do weapons and environment pieces for this game. But if I see there's a lot of interest in doing characters for Doom, I would do a follow-up video to this one showing the Doomslayer, because it's pretty cool. Like the character here, pretty cool. Seeing the armor, the inside of the helmet, all that. So let me know if you're interested in that, and we'll make a video. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, leave a like and leave a comment. Goes a long way. It helps the channel a lot. Make sure you ring that bell if you want to see those posts that I do on the community tab. Thank you so much for watching until this point. All my socials are in the description. I'll see you in the next one.